tools that you showed from like the MMO one, are there a bunch of different? I assume there are a bunch of different entry pages like that for different types of quests or interactions or things. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not just one generic page for everything.
Depends on the company. I'm trying to remember the one company I worked at was pretty lo-fi. It might have been one. But I've always thought that this approach to creating quests, it has quite a bit of potential itself to be, a way to create generative content for players. Because you know what this animal is. You know this is a delivery quest. It's a certain type of drama. And if you're making a game, say you want to have a game that, creates some kind of dramatic experience for the player, and gives them quests of a certain type at a certain time. This is one way the game can be aware of, well, here's another combat type quest, here's another tragedy or emergency type quest when a tornado comes through town or whatever. The game can be aware of what type of animal this content is. And if you work at this level as a writer, it's more pleasant as a writer, honestly. In theory, the game could then make better use of this content and be, noticing that the player keeps taking the fetch quests and start giving the player more of those or something like that, or realize the player needs something to spice up their experience. Another one of the key benefits, I think, of thinking in this kind of more abstract layer quests. Any other questions?
Yeah, so we typically don't have access to, AAA resources or anything, so our games are usually pretty small. Do you have any tips on keeping stories small but still interesting?
Good question. Just in class today, we're looking at our final projects and folks are building some things out. For one student, he didn't want to do anything very large. My suggestion to him was looking at one character and going kind of deep on one character. I had a project a couple years back where a student just had the character's face, and it was kind of a top tree interaction. And as you were rude to them or achieved something or not, the character's eyes would change or their expression would change. And so it was pretty kind of localized, very simple interaction, kind of a one-screen interaction. But because there was continued interaction with one character, you began to feel like you were building up a relationship with them, getting to know their personality, getting to try out different techniques, social interactions with them. So that might be a starting point. Just kind of keep it localized to a personality of some kind that's interesting. Finally, very rarely in a job have I had to face that problem of keeping something small. Usually the directive is write as much as you possibly can. Secondary and tertiary conversations just fill up our game with stuff. Writing and recording is actually pretty cheap. If you're bringing the actors in, you might as well have them record 10,000 of that. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I do want to at least present this set of tools that you can use. I don't think everybody will want to take advantage of them, but there's some stuff we use for the class I teach, which again, it's for writers. It doesn't presume any background in programming. But I feel like anybody who's studying game writing needs to at least wrestle with nonlinearity in some fashion. I mean, even if you're delivering your stuff in Microsoft Word, you're going to have to have some kind of notation about, what line to play when a certain game state is active. And just even in MS Word, it gets to be kind of a hairy problem to get all the pieces there and really catch all the edge cases. So we do a little bit of coding, I guess you would call it. We use this tool called BYOB, and it's all visual coding. In a minute, I'll talk through some stuff you guys can follow along with if you want. But essentially, it takes some of the hassle out of coding and interaction in general, because you can just drag out these blocks. You don't have to worry about parentheses and semicolons and stuff like that. And so turn it, I have to change this to direction. So you can just play with these blocks, and they do an action. Very rarely can you actually crash a script using these visual blocks, and they just kind of snap together like Legos. You can just build scenes like cutscenes. You can build conversations, and it's pretty easy. It's pretty just kind of drag and drop, kind of plug and play stuff. And before I go too deeply into this tool. I'll just mention that for the course, over the couple years, between the students and me helping students, we've come up with a library of custom blocks that make some of this quest writing a little bit easier. So I put those out as an open source library. So if you get this tool, BYOB, and you import those blocks, you have a pretty good starting point for creating some kind of quest with inventory and items and navigation, that kind of thing. So what I'm going to do is show some of that. It's not saved. So it's all online, and there's like 3 or 4 hours of videos that I recorded for the course, kind of to get some of this techie stuff out of the lectures and just kind of more self-serve for students who want to go deep into it or not, depending on their interest. So let me see if I can connect to the network. Let's see if this works. Business always happens. I might just reboot it if I was having trouble opening the lobby too. So while I do this, if anybody wants to pull up the BYOB, if you just search for BYOB programming, you'll end up at a site where you can download BYOB 3. What should I do? Should I show that process or show what I've done? Why don't I do this? Why don't I show the template that I've created? No, let me try. I'm going to reboot one time. I'm going. So I'll blab a bit while this is happening. So in addition to this stuff I mentioned, BYOB, this library of blocks you can get to kind of get you jump started on the quest. I built a template with those blocks that has kind of 2 rooms the player can navigate between. It handles player movement in 4 directions. It handles inventory, so if there's a place where you can get an item and give the item to a character. So it's a full quest built out with these blocks. I got to reboot against Swim on the Mac. It essentially gives you a quest, and you can just change the dialogue and have basically export a piece of software for the Mac, or the PC, or Linux if you want. So it actually will build a piece of software you can share with other people. So it's kind of like a shell. You can fill whatever you want. But if you want to go further and build something a little more unique, add a location, add a character or whatnot, online are these videos for the game blocks library that I'm talking about. And you can just go watch the respective ones for what you care about. There's one on the inventory system, there's one on movement, and so for any aspect of it you care about. I can actually show this on the Mac, so maybe I'll just do that.
So when you sit down to write a quest, how do you begin? Like, do you write it on paper and then move it, or do you use a whiteboard? Do you just throw ideas out and whichever one lands on your chair you do?
It's often driven by the tool you're using. And all the games I've worked on, the conversations were hanging off of characters. So I'd often have just a character on the map, and I'd create the conversations with that character, and then start looking at that name, Joe Schmo, guy on the street, and then start thinking, well, what can he do? Maybe it might be a minor set of arcs or something, but oftentimes I didn't really say much about side quests, but writers often have a ton of freedom in terms of what the side quests they give a player, and obviously you work with a level designer on that. But I often just start with a character and just look at, play the game. They always say some writers won't play the game that they're working on, but you do that as a writer. You go and play the levels, you look around the room, you see the character, all the texturing and bump mapping stuff. All that kind of evokes like a person, and so that's, I think, a good starting point. again, starting with the person themselves. What do they care about? What might they want you to do? What might they think of you? That kind of thing. All right. So I'm in. You guys can't see it, but I'm in.
Yeah, sometimes if you're connected.
This will prove the cross-platform nature of the shoe.